So I've been given the monumental task this evening of introducing the gentleman who needs no introduction to those in the philatelic literature world. David Beech was the curator of the philatelic collections at the British Library from 1983 to 2013 and head of that department from 1991 until his retirement in 2013. His responsibilities included the Crawford Library of Philatelic Literature, and he initiated its conservation program as well, the publication of its modern printed catalog, and its recent digitization project. So I met David nearly 5 years ago on a visit to London. At the British Library, I was greeted with one of the world's greatest, by one of the world's greatest ambassadors for the hobby of philately, of philatelic research. He was very gracious with his time and suggestions during that visit, and the subsequent conversations we've had since have been great. We're happy that he came all the way from London for this occasion, and it is my true honor to introduce to you my friend, our friend, David Beech.
Well, Mr. President of the American Philatelic Research Library, Mr. President of the American Philatelic Society, philatelists and friends, thank you, Jay, for your very kind words, but despite all of that, I'm still just little old me. You'll have to forgive me if I break off from speaking, as I've recently been suffering from a respiratory complaint. In fact, so much so that I was wondering whether I would have to take part in your election coming up for president. I wasn't quite sure about this at all, thinking that I might have to give a few things away. You know, I realised I couldn't, and as you see, I haven't got the haircut for it. I've always felt extremely welcome in the United States. I think there are two occasions I'd draw your attention to in recent years. The first was in 2001, when I was privileged to give a paper to the Collectors Club in New York, and also to visit the match factory. I'll come back to that a little bit later on. In 2005, I was privileged to give the second annual Zunman lecture, there's the cough, at the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. And I've never told the National Postal Museum this story, because when I was entering the country, the border guard, having taken my fingerprints, said, is this trip business or pleasure? And I really didn't know what to answer. So he asked the question, why are you here? And I said, I'm here to give a lecture about the first postage stamps of Hawaii. And the border guard said, you know something about those? And I said, well, the Smithsonian think I do. Well, it was in 2001, as I've said, that I came to the United States and to visit what was then known as the Match Factory. And I remember very distinctly, and we've still got the photograph somewhere, of coming into this building with Bob Lamb and Ginny Horn. And I remember Bob, we drove over from State College, where the library then was, and Bob got out a key and he put it into a padlock, and there was a great big door, which is still at the other end of the building, but now much repaired and looking wonderful. And he drew this door back and we came into the building. And we looked around, we probably had flashlights to see what was going on. It was a different sort of place. But today it's a different sort of place again. And you could see then, despite all of that, all the possibilities of what the place might turn out to be. And the very place where the library now exists and has opened, we could see. It had all of the possibilities, all of the majesty, all of that space then in its primitive state. And in fact, if you look in the handout that comes today, you can see what it was and what you could very clearly see that it was going to become. So that was absolutely fantastic, and I'm absolutely delighted to be back here to congratulate you all on transforming that space from a mess, but a mess with possibilities, into a great philatelic library space. So I congratulate you all, APRL trustees, both current and past, the American Philatelic Society, the librarians across the years and currently TERA, and colleagues, helpers, volunteers, sponsors, and all who contributed across the years. Many, many congratulations to you all. The library has, in consequence of all of this, improved its facilities out of all recognition, and all of this is of enormous value to philately everywhere in the world. Just look at the wonderful reading room there is, the facilities, the chairs, the tables, the research facilities, the inquiry service, the space that makes possible management of collections. You can't have donations without tables and space to sort things out. The cataloguing, the conservation and binding. May I suggest, Mr. President, that you need to double your binding budget if you can. May I suggest that becomes another key thing to do. Without that, a lot that you've got won't last. The Union catalogue has been another development that just couldn't happen without the facilities. And digitisation is the latest kid on the block. Research value, so important to all aspects of scholarship. But of course, keynote addresses have to be keynote for reasons. And we currently are at the crossroads in philatelic libraries and philatelic scholarship, because we must look not only to those great achievements that we've already made, but we must look to the future. Now, in addition to more of the same, more books, more binding, more cataloguing, more sorting out, more fun, the great challenge of the future is digitisation. Without digitisation, we're stuck. Digitisation is incredibly difficult to do. It's expensive, and it needs an international approach and an international dimension. The way to look at it is that one day, and this will be a long time, one day everything that we have and we like will be digitised. That's the only way to look at it. It might take 50 years, but that digitisation will take place. And that, of course, revolutionises research and scholarship everywhere. It means you can do things anywhere in the world, not just here on this day. One of the great events in the last year or two has been the Global Philatelic Library, which is a World Union catalogue of philatelic material. But added to that, just recently, just this year, has been my pet hobby subject, the Crawford Library Digitisation Project. Now, the Crawford Library is a library which is 95% complete of all philatelic literature from the very first item in 1861 through to 1913. And this is 4,500 volumes, 95% complete. And when I arrived at the British Library 33 years ago, that library was in a bit of a mess. It needed a lot of work done to it. So we got together to start its conservation. And the part of that conservation was rebinding, deacidification, lamination, all those things that librarians love and do and achieve. And it also included, most fortunately, microfilming. And that was the second way in which we were preserving this library. And it was fortunate, and of course we didn't know it as the years went past, that what you could do from microfilm was to make digital images. Now, the most expensive thing about making digital images in printed books is actually the turning of the pages. That's a lot of work. But if you've already microfilmed it, the turning of the pages has already been done, and the microfilming is almost an automatic procedure. So the Crawford Library Digitisation Project was to do all of those things and to digitise. And this year at the exhibition in New York, the Crawford Library Digitisation Project was launched by Frank Wharton, the current president of the Royal. And on that day, 600,000 pages of digitised philatelic literature was made available to the world for free. When the project is completed, and that will be in some little time because there are technical and copyright questions, we will have added to the philatelic literature count 1.5 million pages of books. And this, in the terms of philatelic libraries and the future, is incredibly important because this is the rare stuff. This is the valuable stuff. This is the stuff that crumples. This is the stuff where there's only 1 or 2 copies. It is for free. It is for everyone. It is for all time. Absolutely fantastic. So it is for this library and for all of the philatelic libraries of the world to work together on this digital project and many other digital projects. But there are 1 or 2 things that we've got to get right first. The first is that once something has been digitised, it's not to be digitised again. It's an expensive process. Now, just thinking about that, in coordinating all of that, how are you going to do that? So what it is going to need, in my view, is some kind of international conference to bring together all of the libraries to see what has been digitised, what doesn't need to be digitised, so we only do it once. We can't afford to waste those valuable resources. So there's a conference coming up. The other thing that is very dear to my heart and very dear to all of your hearts is the question of how we educate researchers in a digital world. Digitisation people don't tend to think in terms of printed books, and if you don't think that way, then you don't know how to give the references in your articles and books properly. So how that's going to come together eventually is going to be really rather complicated. And people just don't know how to research in philately. I've written about it. There's much more to be written about it. This is no small task. A lot of work still to be done. Now, just on my trip here, I've been travelling around the United States, and I've been in St. Louis. And whilst there, I took the opportunity of visiting one of the 3 components part of the Crawford Library. 3 main parts: the Earl of Crawford himself, who in 1901 purchased the Tiffany Library and the Frenkel Library later on. And what nobody had actually done had been to St. Louis to see the grave of Tiffany. And I went there with Alex Hyman, and we went to the grave and we found it, and it's all there. And an article will be appearing hopefully in the American Philatelist in due course. Now, he bought this philatelic library in 1901 for £2,000. A lot of money then, quite a lot of money now. But let's think about what's been done to that library. I've described what the result is, but across my 30 years, and it was a 30-year project at the British Library, I managed to get £3 million spent on that conservation, that microfilming work, and on the digitisation. To get £3 million out of the British government, I'd tell you, is a tough act. And that meant binding, conservation, microfilm, digitisation. And those partners in that was the Global Philatelic Library, which you must see, the Royal Philatelic Society London, the former British Philatelic Trust. And as a result of all of this, in due course, we will be able to return the Tiffany Library, purchased for £2,000, back to the United States and to the world in digital form. And I think that is a wonderful thing to have done in due course. So here we are at a pivotal junction for APRL, the junction of printed and digital. There's an enormous amount of work to do, a lot of research for the future, a lot that will be possible. When I think about the people that used to come to research at the Crawford Library, they would come from all around the world. And one person in particular, I remember, because he had worked out somehow that a particular issue of postage stamps from Colombia had been issued at an earlier date. And every year he'd come from Colombia to London to look at the Crawford Library and the periodicals there to see whether he could find an earlier reference to the issuing of these stamps. And I remember so distinctly and with great pleasure when one day he was very, very excited because he'd found the evidence he was looking for. But he had to come all the way from Colombia once a year to do that. Now he can do it anywhere, anytime. He just does it. And think what a tremendous advantage that is. And that is why digitization is so important. So in closing, I would just like to say, I am David Beech and I approve this message.